Now we are privileged to have the mayor of the Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, the Honorable Muriel Bowser. Thank you very much, Mayor, for coming today and coming back so shortly after you were here just a few weeks ago.
Thank you, David. It's my pleasure.
So anything new in the District of Columbia these days?
Well, there's a lot new all over our country and certainly right here in Washington, D.C. But I couldn't be more proud of our team and residents who are helping to confront this pandemic and the many days of demonstrations we've had in D.C.
So let's talk about something that everybody in the world has seen, the protest that occurred in Lafayette Park, Lafayette Square a few weeks ago. So who was supposed to police that? Was that the District of Columbia Police, the National Guard? Who was really in charge of policing it, in your view?
Well, I think there's been a lot of finger pointing going on, and you've probably watched the federal forces point fingers at each other, which is the problem that we have called out, David. These in Washington, D.C., we police demonstrations all the time. We're the seat of the federal government. People come here to address their grievances with the government. We do parades, we do the 4th of July, we do inaugurations, and all of those are done in partnership with the Metropolitan Police Department, or the DC Police, which was our local police, and with federal police as well that have responsibilities in the district, the United States Park Police, the Capitol Police, and sometimes we use the DC Guard on those large scale events. So we approach all of those events in that way. The federal government, however, is responsible for federal facilities like the White House and Lafayette Park in front of the White House. And all of the people that you saw, and I assume you're referring to the very unfortunate event where peaceful protesters were cleared from in front of the park. And they were all federal police, we believe, under the command of the Attorney General.
Okay, so in the future, have you and the federal government coordinated such that if something like that happened again, it would be clear who's in charge of policing things, or has that not worked out yet?
Well, it is clear who's in charge of policing things. I think from the federal point of view, which I can't tell them how to do their business, that you're right to question if there was a legitimate chain of command. Who were the park police listening to? Who were the National Guardsmen assigned to listen to? Because then nobody can really think of a situation where the Attorney General should be directing those officials. So those are some things that certainly have to be worked out on the federal end, and it may come down to the Congress getting the right answers.
Well, there's a bill in Congress now that would prevent the president from federalizing the DC police force, I believe. I believe the president must have the authority somehow to federalize the DC police force. Is that a realistic possibility that he would do that, or that bill will pass?
Well, I think no one ever thought of a scenario where that threat would be made, or certainly that it would ever happen. But there is a provision in our home rule charter. It has some hurdles, but they're not very high hurdles that would enable the president to require the mayor of the district to release the Metropolitan Police Department, which we would regard as a very not just a significant affront to our autonomy that's granted to us, but we think it would make the district less safe. Because the federal government, with whatever chain of command they have determined, would not be in the best position to provide local policing.
Okay, so speaking of Congress, there's a number of other bills that Congress is taking up recently, or going to be taking up, relating to the district. One of them deals with making the district the 51st state. I believe that's going to be taken up by the House shortly. What is your prognosis of where that stands in terms of getting passed?
Well, I would say that we are very excited about it. We expect that the House of Representatives is going to vote in the affirmative for DC statehood, which has never happened in the history of the statehood struggle. This bill has more co-sponsors in the House. In fact, it has enough to pass just with the number of people who have co-sponsored it. And it has a record number of senators who are also on the bill. We were with the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader Hoyer the other day with our Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, and they announced the vote date, which is going to be next Friday. And this is amid the Congress trying to work on a myriad of pieces of legislation during the pandemic, and they haven't been able to schedule everything. But they made the point to schedule this before they go out and recess, and I think that is a huge development in the move towards statehood.
Does it require a majority vote or a 2/3 vote?
It requires a simple majority in both houses.
Okay.
So where we are is you've heard the president and the Senate Majority Leader call out the issue in the starkest partisan terms. And our argument is that this is not about partisanship, it's about democracy, and that people who pay every bit of the federal taxes as any other American, in fact, more per capita than any jurisdiction, has to be represented by a voting member of the House and 2 voting senators.
And some of people who oppose it basically saying that it's basically racial, that you're essentially going to give a city that is to some extent half black, 3 additional voting members in the House and the Senate. Is that basically it?
That is, that argument has been made for decades that we were too Democratic and too black in Washington, D.C. to be considered a state. And we know that is, those are not the principles of equal representation.
The Congress is also supposed to be dealing with providing you another $700 million that you got shortchanged in the first CARES Act. Is there any chance of you're getting that money at this point, you think?
Well, we're continuing to work it. Speaker Pelosi has very much lived up to her word to us to make sure that it was dealt with in the next piece of legislation, which is the HEROES Act. And we continue to work it from all sides.
So let's go back to the protest. Not too long after the protest, during the middle of the night, Black Lives Matter became the name of the plaza in front of or behind, I guess, Lafayette Park. Did you make that decision yourself? Do you need the city council to approve it? How does that get done?
I made that decision, and I made it the moment I was walking through the streets of Washington and saw federal troops that had advanced from Lafayette Square onto DC streets. And I was with a group of our interfaith leaders who were actually wanting to go to St. John's Church and couldn't because there were a line of federal officers there. I knew then that we had to reclaim those streets and send the powerful message that not only are these DC streets, but we have a moment in history right now to stand up for our Constitution, stand up for fairness and justice in policing, and to hold officials accountable. And I knew that Black Lives Matter Plaza could be that place.
Now, you've been sued to stop that designation. I assume you're confident you'll win the lawsuit?
Well, I'm very happy to defend my decision in the district, in court, in any court.
So this has been a challenging time for other reasons as well. You have to deal with the COVID-19. So let's talk about that easy decision you have to make there.
Yeah.
So on COVID-19, we're now in phase 1.
Yes.
And tomorrow you're making an announcement on whether phase 2 will occur or not. what are the decisions and criteria you're going to use about whether to go into phase 2?
Well, David, we have been very methodical, and I think so far our experience with the spread of the virus is suggesting that we're doing it the right way. Today, for example, we reported 56 new cases. That's among the lowest number that we've had since since mid-March. So that's a very good thing. We've identified our metrics. We have been communicating on almost a daily basis how we're responding to COVID-19. And our residents and businesses have told me in no uncertain terms that they really appreciate how we are approaching this. So we look at several metrics, including a 14-day decline in transmission, which we achieved today, how we are contact tracing and how quickly we can be in touch with a person with a positive case and their contacts. We're also looking at test positivity. So how many people are testing positive over the number of total tests, and we're way below 10%, which is a good thing. And so I think that we're going to approach entering phase 2 in very good shape.
Okay, now 4th of July is coming up, and sometimes people gather on the 4th of July in large groups. What are you going to do to prevent that, or how are you going to deal with that?
Well, that's a big question. And certainly we've been talking about mass gatherings, especially since we've seen these First Amendment demonstrations, which is what they would be called in the public safety world. In the public health world, they're called mass gatherings. And so it is a big concern when we see people, especially people who are traveling here from other places, where they might have hot spots. We continue to be very concerned. So we've told people to get tested if they think they need a test. We've opened up our testing all around the city. Now our fire department is participating in free testing in evenings throughout the city, which is very helpful. I'm actually going to be talking to the Interior Secretary today. I'm not exactly sure what the plans for the National Park Service are, and so we're going to be getting to the bottom of what their plans are.
Okay, so let's talk about the DC police force. We saw in Atlanta and Minneapolis some signs of police conduct that obviously was inappropriate and deadly. So are the DC police trained differently than the Minneapolis or Atlanta police? And are you fairly confident that something like we saw in those instances couldn't happen in DC?
Well, I'm not an expert on Minneapolis or Atlanta, but I can tell you about our experience in Washington, D.C. And I think that any mayor will tell you that police and community relations that's a relationship we work on each and every day, but a bad incident can happen anytime or any place. And so we recognize that. And so what we have done over the last 18 years is reform the Metropolitan Police Department. Many people will remember when our police department didn't enjoy a great reputation. In fact, we entered into a consent decree back in 2002 with the Department of Justice addressing use of force. And since then, we have consistently implemented reforms to the point that when the DC auditor asked the independent monitor to come in recently within the last several years and review DC police, that independent monitor found that DC police were acting in an unbiased constitutional way. And so we thought that that was a very good mark on how, not only how our reforms have been implemented, but how they have taken root in the culture. Let me give you a couple of examples. We've professionalized our police force over the years. We require our officers to have some higher education credits to come into the department. That means they've been more exposed and they're actually older than in some other departments. We've implemented de-escalation training. We've outfitted all of our officers with body-worn cameras. which we think adds a layer of accountability that's very important. We've been very intentional about ensuring that we have a diverse police department as well, so that our police department looks like our city. And we're very proud of that. So we have more minority officers, more female officers, and more officers that actually live in the jurisdiction where they police in Washington, D.C. In my current budget before the council, I doubled down on DC resident police officers in a program that we're very proud of, that hires DC high school students, pays them as civilians in the police department, sends them to the University of the District of Columbia, and then they can enter the police academy as people who grew up here in DC. So we're very proud of that.
Now, there is a movement in many cities, and I think somewhat in DC, to reduce funding for the police departments. And some people want to defund it completely, but you have resisted that. So you're fairly confident that you can get your budget through the city council?
Well, the city council is reviewing it. I know that they're hearing a lot of the calls that you hear, that I've heard, and in some jurisdictions may be valid calls for shifting resources. But we know that DC residents and taxpayers have been very generous to the government in allowing us to make investments across the board. So just in the 5 budgets that I've sent to the council, for example, since I've been mayor for the last 5.5 years, we have seen police investments go up by 12% over 5 years. We've seen on the other hand, education investments go up over 40%. In my current budget, despite the fact that we saw an $800 million dive in revenues, I actually increased public education spending by 3%. We can look at other categories too, like the human services, what we're doing to end homelessness. Those investments have gone up over 70% in the last 5 years. The things that we're doing for violence intervention, in partnership with the council, we created a whole new agency that is non-law enforcement police and public safety intervention or violence interruption. And we've gone from 0 to funding a complete new agency in those activities. So the bottom line, David, is our public safety funding is not just policing. It's opportunity programs and education and job training, and it's also intervention programs in violence interruption and behavioral health intervention. And I think the budget that the DC Council has exactly what we need in all 3 of those buckets.
Back on the public school system in the District of Columbia, when do you think you will make a decision about whether public schools will open in the fall?
We will make a decision shortly. We will have a summer bridge program that we expect to start on August the 10th. And that's going to be able to have our kids in the transition year. So we have some time where those kids are going to start early, I think in grades 3, 6, and 9. And then by August 31st, we will be ready for school. Our expectation is that we will have in-person learning with a modified schedules to accommodate social distancing. But I'm getting those final recommendations based on a survey that we've conducted of our public school families.
So when would you think that the district might be completely open? In other words, if all parts of the district can operate as they were before COVID-19, is that sometime next year, middle of next year maybe, or maybe later? Is there any guess on that?
I don't really have a guess on that. And I think a lot of it depends on the effectiveness and availability of a vaccine as to when we wouldn't have to have the type of social distancing guidelines that we expect to have through phase 4. Okay.
And what do you think the business community can do a better job of in helping you? The business community in Washington has, an interest in helping, I'm sure. Is there anything the business community can do that they're not doing that you would like the business community to do?
Well, I think that in various sectors of the business community can help us amplify this message is that the response to COVID and the shutdowns related to COVID are bigger than any local government can handle. So really having relief packages that come through the Congress by sector are going to be hugely important. When I think about housing, I'm very concerned. We have been able to do less with our housing dollars than we expected because of the dip. When I think of the rent relief that people are going to need, both tenants and landlords, those are going to be huge numbers, and they are included in the HEROES Act. And that needs to get through Congress. When I think of the commercial tenants and commercial landlords, they're in a similar boat. And some of them are going to come back last, like our large venue tenants. So there needs to be relief there. Higher education, they are going to continue to be, I think, hit, and they're big employers in our city. So we need them to be addressed. I think there's been a lot of attention on hospitals and medical providers. So we want to continue to focus on that as well.
So finally, you are still running the city largely remotely. Are you in your apartment now or your house now? And are you going to keep doing that?
No, I'm in my home, but I'm largely in person. I'm running the city. We work out of a emergency operations center. Since the last time we spoke, I'm back at City Hall some. So I work between City Hall, our emergency operations center at the health department, and when I'm doing conversations like this from home.
Okay, so your daughter, Miranda, is happier when you're home, I assume, and when you got to go back to the office, she's not as happy?
She's very happy to have me at home, and it's fun to be able to take a break and play with her.
So Mayor, I want to thank you for coming today, and thank you for giving us your insights, and we look forward to your decision tomorrow, and you're always welcome to come here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Bye-bye.